I'm Ben Weingarten.
I'm Will Chamberlain.
I'm Inez Stepman.
I'm Amber Duke.
And this is NatCon Squad, where common good and common sense meet. NatCon Squad is produced by the Edmund Burke Foundation, the home for national conservatism. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, it's been a whirlwind of a week to open up the Trump presidency, and today we're going to be talking about a whole bevy of topics with regard to the purported peaceful transition of power, starting with Amber, who will take us through at least some of President Trump's opening executive orders. I'll talk a bit about the blanket pardon, effectively, of the January Sixers. Inez will talk a little bit about some of President Biden's parting shots, including what I would call the pardon from hell of many of his family members. And then last but not least, Will take us home to talk about the asinine attempt to smear Elon Musk over a purported Nazi salute that, of course, was anything but. But with that, we'll tip it off with Amber.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Yeah. So it's been a whirlwind for sure. And not least of which involved in that whirlwind is the hundreds of executive orders that Trump signed in his first couple of days in office, including, I believe, 200 on the first day alone, including some of which he signed at the Capital One Arena rally, which was created for his supporters to go to and see him in person in lieu of attending the inauguration, which was moved from outside to inside the Capitol Rotunda, therefore limiting access. But there's been some pretty major EOs that have been signed, including a lot on the border, declaring the crisis at the southern border a national emergency, reinstating remain in Mexico, declaring the cartels a foreign terrorist organization, also calling for expedited removal of people who have been in the country for less than 2 years. Currently, it's like less than 2 weeks or something to that effect. And there's a bunch of other immigration-related orders as well, one on birthright citizenship and prohibiting that from applying to children of illegal immigrants. There's a list of executive orders on the environment, including declaring a national energy emergency, undoing a lot of Biden orders related to protection of federal lands from oil and gas drilling. He also paused offshore wind leasing and withdrew from the Paris Climate Treaty. He got the United States out of the World Health Organization and also signed some executive orders on cultural issues, like wrapping up all of the federal DEI offices by the end of the day on Wednesday, the same day we are recording this podcast, and recognizing biological sex as the determinant of federal policy as opposed to gender identity. So a lot of really great stuff. I believe we're aiming to do a special podcast just breaking down some of the most important executive orders because there are so many and so many great ones. But I think from a broader sort of 10,000 foot view, what all of this tells us is that Trump did not come to play, and his team was obviously very prepared for this moment. The speed at which they were able to get all of these signed suggests we're in for a very different Trump administration this time around. And looking ahead to the midterms, although that's 2 years from now, there's a very good chance with a very slim majority that Republicans have in the House that they could lose full control of government. So realistically, Trump only has about 18 months to enact his agenda. So it's good to see that he's not wasting one single second.
Yeah, totally agree with Amber's bottom line. What these EOs show me is an administration that is prepared and capable in a way the first Trump administration completely was not. Some of these are symbolic. A lot of them are really substantive, and they're on really key issues, things that we've been talking about here on this podcast for a long time, it's just very heartening to see, because even some of these, there's going to be a ton of legal challenges and so on we're going to work through. What they are is a tip of the hand to really, really critical issues. I just want to highlight one. I couldn't tell if Amber, I can't remember if Amber mentioned this or not, but on top of all the things that Amber listed, there's a couple different orders in here dealing with the federal bureaucracy. One is returning Schedule F, which is making essentially policy-making decisions, making sure that those people are not treated as protected civil servants. They're making policy-level decisions. They should be hireable and fireable by the president, just like right off the bat, returning that to the White House and to the executive branch, and then also looking at the merit hiring of federal employees and stopping to give weight. I don't even try how to say that to purely to degrees and certifications to look at actual substantive knowledge and federal hiring and firing. These are both things that are going to go through the courts. But again, this shows overall an administration incredibly well prepared to take office in 2025 and to enact Trump's agenda. And actually, the only thing I can add further to that is that I think it would be a spectacular thing for the Republican Congress to at least run through these EOs and see which one of them needs to be reinforced with legislation. Because ultimately, executive orders are only going to last the 4 years of the Trump presidency. Most of these things, huge W's that they need to be backed up by legislation from Congress. And I think it would be a really good test for Republicans in the Congress to see how much of the Trump agenda they can actually get behind. I would like to see them tackle that before taxes. Even if just symbolically, I think it would be important to know where everybody stands on a lot of these things, because these are promises made and promises delivered all along the line.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the executive orders. I mean, it seems very obvious that, two things I was worried about are not going to come to pass. So the first thing I was worried about is that President Trump was just kind of coming back into office to be the president again, right? And maybe to deal with the indictments. But it's very clear that no, what President Trump wants to be doing is to govern again and to fix whatever mistakes and what he left undone in his first term. The second worry was, are they going to come in prepared? Are they going to be ready to actually take action and be more effective in the first term? And that much seems obvious that they are. I mean, these executive orders are not half-baked. They are extremely robust. I think the best example of this is probably the executive order dealing with DEI in the federal government. It is a very layered executive order that not only imposes the new rule of we're not doing DEI anymore, but is very thoughtful about how it's going to impose that rule on the agencies, basically ensuring that, that combined with what's going on at the PVO office, all the agencies are going to have to immediately report to the White House about how they are implementing and getting rid of their DEI employees. They have to, ask around and identify whether or not there are any employees who previously worked in what was a DEI position, but have been burrowed in or somehow their job title has been changed so that it doesn't look like a DEI position anymore. That needs to be reported to the president. And then all these people just need to be put on instant administrative leave. We'll worry about whether or not we can totally fire them and cut their salaries. But the most important thing is that they're just not coming into the office anymore. They're not connected to email. They're on administrative leave, taking a salary, doing whatever they want to come. Perfect. I think a good mindset shift, especially for people. And, the point here is not necessarily cut spending. Hopefully that's a beneficial after effect. The point is to get these people to stop doing harmful things to our government. And, if that means we have to pay them a salary while they sit at home and do nothing, fine. For now, let's just get them fired. And I think in general, that's just one executive order out of many. There's just a ton of good ones that demonstrate similar levels of preparation. The administration has taken advantage of the years that they've had to prepare for this, and they're really getting off on the right foot.
Yeah, I'll to some extent reiterate what's been said. I think what's striking about the orders is they're wide-ranging, they're comprehensive, they're tightly written and clearly written with the expectation that there's going to be attempts to litigate them out of existence, which started almost immediately as they were initially being issued. And they really focus on the most important things, and they translate the most fundamental concepts about putting American sovereignty first, putting America's national interests first, actually sort of reinstilling the fact that we are a republic over the kind of bureaucratic, tyrannical government that we've seen, depoliticizing and de-weaponizing the government across all of the issues. And we said some of them, but immigration, which is obviously multifaceted in the approach there, energy, DEI, foreign aid, free speech, administrative state reform, radical gender ideology, And then literally anti-weaponization, which is one of the executive orders, which is about rectifying the weaponization of the prior administration, as well as, of course, we didn't even mention, because there's so many of these, that we could hack at removing the security clearances of the intelligence community officials who weaponize that and trade on those security clearances to undermine their political foes, namely Donald Trump and the Trump administration. I think in part what this illustrates is recognition of the struggles in Trump 1 administration, including very early on with the quote-unquote travel ban, and how the left and the media attacked that and essentially hung that around the neck of the administration and halted a lot of the progress that was being made initially. But also tactically and strategically in this case, the notion of hitting the left with just a massive blizzard of executive action has really got them stuck and snowed them in, essentially, because the media and the Democrat Party, I don't even think, has any idea what to even go after, because there are so many different things they're being hit with. It's sort of the best analogy that I can think of is in The Simpsons. There's this depiction of Montgomery Burns and all of the illnesses they had, and there were so many that they kind of blocked each other out. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way here, but there's so much that the left doesn't even know how to respond. And very rarely is the left put on its back feet. You know, in the coming weeks, I'm sure we're going to see attempted sob stories to try and sort of argue that these are immoral or that they're otherwise undermining the country and going after good people, etc. But I think right now you see clearly that there is an America First direction on the one side. And then on the other side, there's an inability to know how best to respond, particularly, of course, when you have a decisive mandate here, and Democrats themselves have to be careful about what they oppose, because it could end up leading to them getting primaried or them losing in general elections in the midterm. So this is exactly the way the administration should have started off. There's no guarantees you get anything more than trifecta control for 2 years. You know there are going to be attempts to try and gum up the works. And obviously, to Inez's point, codification in law ought to be the ultimate goal, and there ought to be legislative extensions to almost every executive order that exists, because as quickly as you can pass these with a pen stroke, they can be revoked with a pen stroke, as we saw with all the rescissions and revocations. I think 78 of them of Joe Biden's policies immediately. But nevertheless, you have to look at this as the proper, ambitious, smart, well thought out attempt to get off on the right foot and get running within the first 100 days and really within the first 100 hours. And the last thing I'll note, it was just hilarious to witness, first of all, kind of the signing of the executive orders in front of thousands of people. Never seen anything like that before. I assume that's unprecedented in American history, and throwing out the pens for the signing ceremony. And then also President Trump, in contrast to his predecessor, signing executive orders and essentially doing an ad hoc press conference, freewheeling on a whole slew of topics for 90 minutes. Unprecedented stuff that we're witnessing. So on the optics and style on the one hand and on the substance on the other, I think everyone has to be pretty thrilled with what they've witnessed in the first couple of days of the presidency. And with that, I guess I'll transition to myself to talk about one specific executive order that came forth that I didn't even mention in running through all these other ones, nor did anyone else, I think, which is what's been characterized as a blanket pardon of January 6ers. And I have to say at the front, we can walk through the substance of this really quickly, and I guess we can do that at the outset, that essentially what the pardon does here is there are commutations for the sentences for 14 individuals convicted of more serious offenses. Some of them, in some ways, the most asinine when you consider the seditious conspiracy, people who weren't even there, outrageous sorts of sentences in the first place. And then beyond that, and kind of the second part, is a full, complete, and unconditional pardon to all other individuals convicted of offenses related to events that occurred at or near the Capitol on January 6th, and also the directing of the Attorney General to pursue dismissal with prejudice to the government of all pending indictments against individuals for their conduct related to the events at or near the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. So I think, first of all, this was a courageous pardon to put forth. There was a lot of talk about bifurcating this between those who were charged with obstruction of an official proceeding or parading or basically being at the Capitol or entering the building when the doors were open, not violently, not hurting anyone, etc., and sort of bifurcating them from people who acted violently that day. And instead, essentially, what Donald Trump said when asked to defend, not going with that approach, which would have been the politically correct approach, he basically said, look, people have gone through hell the last few years dealing with the courts, being in prison, et cetera. And essentially, they've paid the price of this. I think another way of looking at it is this was all sort of fruit of a poisonous tree in some ways. And everyone was treated as culpable for an attack on democracy and an insurrection, even though it was never charged that way. You had the torturing of the rule of law with the obstruction of an official proceeding, never applied in an equivalent situation. And obviously the Supreme Court slapped down the interpretation the Biden DOJ used. But essentially, obstruction of an official proceeding was about things like destroying documents in a court case, for example, not what transpired at the Capitol. And then also what this sort of implicitly recognizes is that there may well have been entrapment. There's certainly video evidence and testimony of police brutality that occurred that day and sort of inciting or provoking the crowd. And essentially, when you add on to that the kangaroo courts that persisted, the way that the judges adjudicated in these cases and how hostile they were to the defendants, the way that many defendants were held in pretrial detention for months on end, people with no prior records. In some cases, the alleged beatings and horrible conditions that many people face. One defendant, for example, was pulled out of prison because of the abuse that he took from the guards, and on and on. You put all that together, and the decision was made, blanket pardon. I think, again, this reflects a level of courage that is substantial here, because you have seen a little bit of pushback from Republicans, including Mitch McConnell on this. You've seen a hostile questioning, obviously, from the press. You've seen the left start to attack on this particular order. This was a politically difficult thing to do, not so easy, because it puts, for the left, they'll attack, well, you guys are for the rule of law and you back the blue, but not here. And the president called a shot here, and he basically said there can't be a two-tier standard of justice. BLM rioters were not treated in this fashion. And these people have been subjected to a process that, again, I think one way to think of it is fruit of a poisonous tree, not in the legal sense, but in the colloquial sense. So I wonder what you all make of this, either on the substance of the individual decision, broad decision, or what it illustrates about the president's thinking about how he's going to operate as a lame duck effectively in a second term, or any other takeaways on the implications or ramifications of the commutations and pardons.
I like what the newly confirmed Secretary of State Marco Rubio said about this in response to that accusation that Ben just laid out about, oh, aren't you a hypocrite? I thought you guys backed the blue, and some of these people are charged with assaulting police officers. So two parts. One, he basically made that fruit of the poisonous tree argument that Ben is referencing, right? That the Biden Justice Department and the FBI have done such a politicized and bad job of prosecuting these people. It's gone beyond throwing the book at them. It's a stretched and tortured book, and in many cases there are major procedural problems with how they went about it, how long people were in detention, how much of their sentences they've already served, the length of the sentences. I mean, just up and down the board. This was a insane prosecution, and that's true even in cases where people did something really wrong. Right. I'm not going to sit here and argue that I think people should not do jail time for assaulting a police officer. But the way that these cases were carried out was completely improper and politicized. And it's very difficult now to go back and the president would have to basically retry them in his head, right? Each one, and try to weigh out what's fair and what's not. I mean, that's really not the purpose of the pardon power ultimately. So I think this is ultimately a good decision. I do appreciate that he commuted the sentence of these 14 people. He said that they'll continue to review those cases and the details of those cases, essentially doing what I just referenced, right? Like retrying the cases in a fair way. But those people will retain criminal records. They have served time, right? Let's not forget, these people have already been punished for these crimes, right? To the extent that there were crimes committed, they have already been punished, and many times they've been punished well beyond any reasonable way that they should have paid for these crimes. So I think this is a good move by the president.
I think to your point, and as well, that if Trump were trying to go through each individual case and figure out what he thought was fair for each of these people based on whatever injustices that they faced during the trial process or related to how just their actual sentence was, that also opens up the door for more criticism over him making the wrong decision from the left. Like, they can then go case by case, right, and say, well, why did you pardon this person but only commute this person? Or why didn't you pardon this one but you pardoned this one who was also violent? It just seems like it prolongs the debate as opposed to just getting it all done in one fell swoop and saying, I think the quote in an Axios article about sort of the behind the scenes of how Trump came to this decision was, F it, I'm just going to do them all. And that's really what the posture should be. I mean, because otherwise you get so bogged down in the weeds of each individual case. I tend to agree with that position.
Yeah, I have a strong view that President Trump did the right thing. And I think one point, I haven't seen a lot of what I think is the best argument for why there should have been a blanket pardon. I haven't seen it emphasized enough. Zero January 6th defendants got the trial by jury right they should have been afforded, which means trial by a jury of dispassionate peers. Sorry, DC doesn't have them. DC is 95% Democrat, and all these people are Republican political activists. If you look at the polling about whether or not Democrats tolerate or would be happy about their child bringing home a Republican for dinner as a date or as a potential spouse, they're not happy about it. Almost half of them would be upset. That's way more than is the case with, say, racial differences. And under current law, you can't just exclude black people from a jury that's trying a black defendant, for example. So I think that needs to be looked at the same way. The courts didn't agree with that position, but they were wrong. They were simply flat wrong as a matter of obvious, fairness and justice. And so I think that the way that the Trump administration should be handling this issue when they get this question about like, oh, what about this guy who did this horrible thing? Just very simply, he didn't get a fair trial. And if you guys were serious about giving this person a fair trial, you would have agreed to the change of venue motion so that it was held out of DC. And I mean, it's not just the jurors either. I mean, the judges work in a courthouse that was literally like up maybe 500 yards from where all these activities were taking place. They were far too close to what happened to be dispassionate judges themselves. So I think you just start with the assumption that none of these people got a fair trial in our system. That's enough to justify a pardon.
Yeah, and to that point, that also does raise a broader issue that maybe the administration and hopefully Congress will get around to, which is DC as a venue in general. Is it a fair venue, period? Should cases be moved out of there? And these judges, are there going to be impeachment efforts against any of them? Probably not, I would guess, based upon the lack of political courage to do so. But if you look at the proceedings in some of these cases, it was just mind-boggling how biased and hostile the judges really were, to the point of losing totally being not impartial or independent or fair in presiding over them. Well, from one set of pardons to another, let's transition over to Inez now to talk about President Biden's parting shots.
Yeah, speaking of pardons, using the pardon power, I mean, I think that back to back, all of these pardons probably are going to prompt some discussion of whether we need constitutional limitations on this power, and nobody would prove that more necessary than Biden now, coming on the heels of a first slew of pardons where he basically pardoned an entire class of people, everybody on death row, by commuting their sentences and preventing them from being executed. Right, there's a new slew of pardons right on Monday. Just totally enraging set of pardons. Starting with, of course, and I'm sure Ben will get to it given his remarks at the beginning, but starting with the Biden family. We've got pardons for, quote, any nonviolent offenses against the U.S. going all the way back to 2014, which is sort of interesting, for James Biden, Biden's brother, his wife, Valerie Biden, his sister and her husband, his brother Francis, right? So just for the entire Biden family, this is, of course, after the Hunter pardon. Now, I don't know. It's kind of interesting that Biden did not pardon himself. Maybe he feels he's so old that it's unnecessary, or maybe he felt for some reason that was a step too far, as opposed to pardoning his entire family with a blanket pardon going all the way back to 2014. But he's now the only prosecutable member of the Biden crime family. Just throwing that out there. In some way, this is just like trashy and third world. In some way, more enraging are the pardons for essentially institutional actors who have done some of those weaponization acts of weaponization that we've been talking about for so many years, and some of the things that Trump referred to in his inaugural address, right? So we have pardons for General Milley, who, let's not forget, called our primary geopolitical rival and made a separate deal, circumventing the president of the United States. Forget about pardons. That's potentially treason. And that's not hyperbole. You can't negotiate a separate peace as a general with America's enemies without going through the elected president. Pardons of course, for Dr. Fauci, right? So, and interestingly, that pardon goes back far enough to cover anything that might have to do with gain of function research that he was involved in, right? Pardons for, January 6th committee members like Liz Cheney, potentially interfering with court proceedings. And so all kinds of pardons for these institutional actors. Actually, these make me more angry in a way. And I would just remind everyone that this does not prevent them from now being subpoenaed. And that lying to under oath is also a crime. Perjury is a crime. Those would all be new crimes that they would commit. So this really puts the ball in the House's court, I think, and really puts the ball in with Congress to actually grant transparency and justice in some of these cases, even if prosecution is set out of bounds by these Biden pardons. Anyway, there are more pardons to think about, but I'll throw it out to the rest of you guys after that. And what do you think about these sets of pardons? They really did mar for me I wanted to feel magnanimous on Inauguration Day. I think it's a good American tradition to feel magnanimous. Trump wore a red and blue tie, notably, trying to nod to some form of unity. But these pardons really took that taste of magnanimity. Gosh, I can't talk today. Out of my mouth, because this is just so blatantly corrupt, both on the personal level and, as I said, even more on the institutional level, trying to essentially make these actors who had enormous power avoid responsibility for some of the decisions that they've made that were certainly absolutely inappropriate, and in many cases verge into criminal and potentially prosecutable behavior, and just getting them all off scot-free in this like last minute as your foot's out the door set of pardons. Just a really disgusting move.
What I find so hilarious about the commentary from the left surrounding Biden's pardons is that whether they think they're good or bad, it's still Trump's fault. So if they think that the Biden pardons are good, it's because he had to do it to prevent Trump's weaponization of the Department of Justice to go after his political enemies, which, of course, in and of itself is hilariously hypocritical. But then if they think that the Biden pardons are bad, it's not because they're objectively bad or bad on their face, but because they give cover to Trump for whatever pardons he might want to do. So Biden pardons good, Trump fault. Biden pardons bad, Trump fault. It's just incredible. But I just wanted to dive in a little bit into the Anthony Fauci pardon, because it is very significant that this pardon goes back 11 years to 2014, because it was in May of 2014 that the National Institutes of Health first awarded a grant to EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak to study bat-originated coronaviruses and effectively do gain-of-function research, which was against an Obama-era order for the NIH to stop doing gain-of-function research. Fauci is credibly accused of lying to Congress about that. He is credibly accused of skirting this order, and he's credibly accused of evading FOIA requests, all of which date back to that 2014 initiative to fund the EcoHealth Alliance, which in turn funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology's gain-of-function research that very likely led to the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. So the timing of this is not an accident. It's not a coincidence. This was very deliberately chosen to shield Fauci from the most significant crime he is accused of, which is going around a federal order not to do gain-of-function research and potentially providing the dollars that killed millions of people in the United States alone.
Yeah, strangely enough, I'm okay with all these pardons. I think I've mentioned this before in previous episodes, but my view is we probably need to move on from the system where we all prosecute each other and just move on to a world where we prevent that from happening by pardoning. The administration effectively pardons itself on the way out the door, which I'm just going to be fine with because I don't like the outcome where we're constantly worrying about throwing each other in jail. And okay, the Democrats are the first movers. That's fine. That said, I think the right way for the Republicans to look at this is like, fantastic, a bunch of new witnesses, right? Everybody who's pardoned no longer has Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. They need to be brought in front of Congress and forced to testify. And we need to understand exactly what the Biden administration was up to. I want to understand exactly what the Biden family dealings were and how that corrupt structure works. So bring Hunter, bring Jim, put them under oath, make them testify. And, if they say, oh, I don't want to, this feels, incriminating. It's like, well, guess what? It's not. You have pardon. Tell us what you did. Tell us the crimes you committed. And so I want to see that. I mean, obviously, I have zero patience for any Democrats who are whining about the January 6th pardons when they just watched Biden, do the most corrupt series of pardons in American history by just pardoning his family. And also the Fauci and Milley pardons are both very bad because both of them are very clearly committed crimes, I think. Milley very much broke the chain of command when he was talking with China about giving them forewarning about military action when he's not the commander-in-chief. And Fauci had perjured himself with regard to gain-of-function research as has been discussed. So those pardons are gross in the sort of abstract sense, but I think that the silver lining is maybe we're not going to be able to where we're prosecuting each other anymore after this.
So I think on the merits, definitely the right way to look at it, that these are people who now should be forced to testify. And by the way, if they refuse to testify, they should be prosecuted for it because that's the precedent that's now been set. I think, from a long-term perspective, this just shows you, I think now we have normalization of this use of the pardon power, just like we have normalization now of impeachment. And, I think this is just a natural way that sort of Washington is trending. It's a precedent that we probably haven't thought through all the long-term ramifications of. But that said, the usage of it here at the 11th hour and the rest of it, it shows you that, first of all, the ultimate swamp creature corruptocrat ended his career in fitting fashion. He essentially indicted the Biden crime family by being forced to, and proved that it was a crime family, by being forced to put forth the pardons. Why he didn't pardon himself for his wife, interesting. Maybe because, like the special counsel said, he would be treated as like a doddering old man if he was ever put up on the stand, and he thinks he's untouchable, and he probably is de facto untouchable at this point. But it shows, but I think that this is a fitting, disgraceful, and shameful final act. Also, he indicted the January 6th committee and its staffers. Let's note that as well. But all of those people also should be brought up before Congress in hearings. And beyond that, the only other thing I'd point out is with respect to Milley. The treacherous actions with respect to China are one aspect. Another aspect is, remember, there was that reporting that he was speaking with Nancy Pelosi about use of nuclear weapons. And that's another huge breakdown in the chain of command. Disastrous, really disturbing that he would have interposed himself in connection with decisions regarding the usage of nuclear weapons, that Nancy Pelosi would be involved with him in that effort. And the last thing that's worth noting that's interesting, and I don't think this was just a drafting error, I'm sure there was a rationale for it, and maybe some of the lawyers here have insight that I don't have on this. But if you look, it makes sense why the Fauci pardon goes for acts dating back to, I think, January 1, 2014. But so does Milley's. And so the question is, what other potential crimes were encompassed there or contemplated there? Because we don't know about Milley's acts really beyond the treacherous ones sort of in the run-up to the end of the Trump 1 presidency. What happened dating back to January 1, 2014? Presumably, this has something to do with statute of limitations. So what do you guys think was going on there, to the extent the lawyers have any insights? So with that, let's move on to Will to talk about the media and the left's attempts to smear Elon Musk over, I guess, an errant gesture in celebrating Trump's inauguration.
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk, I think, is reported to be on the Asperger spectrum, which is understandable. Like, I mean, if you ever watched Elon Musk sort of do any sort of expression at one of these Trump rallies, it's very endearing, but it looks weird. Like, he's just kind of a little, discombobulated. So anyway, one of these gestures finally did look vaguely resemble a Roman salute. And the left just jumped all over him. They're like, oh my God, like even Chris Murphy's like, how could you defend this? It's clearly a Nazi salute. It's like, give me a break. The guy's, it's just, Asperger's, they even said something along the lines of, I'm giving my heart to all of you. Like, it's clear what he was trying to do. And yet we just have a media and a left-wing media apparatus that just has not learned a single lesson from the last 4 years at all. That the idea of constantly trying to tar Republicans with the Nazi brand that tactic has run its course, no longer effective, especially when it's so obviously false. I don't even think it's working among Democrats generally. Most people are ignoring it. But I think it connects to something broader, which is I look at the modern Democrat Party and I look at a party that has two big problems. It's bereft of ideas and bereft of leaders. So with Kamala's loss and Joe Biden being seen out, the only remaining sort of leader figure of any real stature that has influence now is Barack Obama. But even Obama, I think a lot of people are really tired of. His influence was demonstrated to be limited during the election when he, tried to lecture black men on why they weren't voting for Kamala, and then a huge, unprecedented chunk of them voted for Trump anyway. And then after that, there aren't any elected office holders in the Democrats that really have any claim to the leadership of the party. Gavin Newsom's got huge problems. He's got the fires in California that he's handled so badly, along with the fact that everybody and their mother is leaving California. It's been terribly managed. And then who else do you have? I mean, the other two big states are New York and Illinois. They've got governors who are totally unimpressive. In Pritzker, who's wild, just absolutely, morbidly obese. I don't think he'd ever have a chance of winning. And then Kathy Hochul, who has, the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a bank clerk, in the words of Nigel Farage. So they don't have anybody. There's nobody left. And so you have all these senators and representatives trying to posture as potentially being the leader of the party in 4 years. But they don't have any charisma on the bench left. And that combined with they're just out of ideas. If the January 6th stuff doesn't work, they really don't have anything to campaign on. They're trying to do the thing where they're saying, the Republicans are the parties of billionaires now. But, I listened to a pretty good podcast between Ezra Klein and Chris Hayes. I know I'm saying that's weird to say, but they were doing and just trying to do a dispassionate analysis of what went wrong for them in the election. And the point that they hit on, which is correct, is that the fact that Trump and Elon are billionaires is the least interesting thing about them and the least relevant thing about them when it comes to their political impact. It's their influence. It's their attention that they are able to attract. And they're not spending any money to do it, right? It's the fact Elon owns X and has the biggest X account there is and can influence the conversation that way. Trump has the bully pulpit of the presidency and was able to build his own social media account and media company and keep it running based solely on the strength of his own account. And so I think that what the Elon smear is just kind of the last gasp of this bizarre, silly, haha, meaner, neener, you're a Nazi type strategy from the left. And it doesn't work too, because Elon is so obviously philo-Semitic. He wears the necklace of the hostages. He's extremely pro-Israel and pro-Jewish and has no time for anti-Semitism. Same thing with Trump. And the left that spent, months and years really apologizing for Hamas and tolerating anti-Semitism in their ranks and doing nothing about anti-Semitism on college campuses is suddenly trying to make this gesture by Elon an indication of his latent anti-Semitism. It's cynical, it fails, and it doesn't work. And I think it's, again, Democrats have a long time in the wilderness to come if this is the best they can do.
Yeah, I think it's a good test of your connection to reality, right? How likely do you think it is that Elon Musk, in front of, thousands of Republicans, did a Nazi salute, right? And was cheered for it? how likely do you think that is? And it really is a test of background principles, right? It shows how far out of touch with reality the background principles of the people who are, I know a lot of them are cynically doing it, but I think a lot of the foot soldiers on the left, right, they really believe this. They believe that, Donald Trump is a Nazi, that their Nazis walk among us every day or whatever. And it's a belief, a background principle belief that the vast majority of the country rejected. I know that there's a meme now, right? Rejected at the ballot box. This kind of lunacy is rejected at the ballot box. You cannot just throw the word Nazi to cover, things that almost everybody, majorities, even upwards of 85%, in some cases, like about the definition of man and woman, believe in, right? You can't just throw these words like a Band-Aid over terrible policies, insane ideas, right? And suggest these things. And I really do think the country is sick of it. I don't think that this news cycle really went anywhere. Actually, I kind of, again, like what Will was saying, they're out of ideas and out of ammo. There's a lot of stuff in these EOs that really does serious damage to institutional leftism. And instead of crying about those or trying to launch any kind of resistance to those, they are obsessed with, this video that easily, if you watch the whole video, it's very clear it's not what he's doing. He's throwing his fart out to the crowd, right? And furthermore, is just easily dismissible by all the times that Democrats have made that hand gesture accidentally, right? While talking to a crowd or in a particular frame, right? It's just, it's absolutely absurd. And I think, it's kind of, the left has been a formidable opponent for decades for the right. And this just seems so cheap, and it seems simple that they haven't realized that this doesn't work at all anymore. So, I always prefer them, I guess, circle jerking about this instead of actually digging into the meat of these EOs and trying to do their best to gum up the works.
Yeah, it's lazy. It's exactly what it is. And it's almost as stupid as when there was discourse a few years ago about whether or not the CPAC stage was fashioned to look like a Nazi logo. Or when Laura Ingraham straightened her arm a bit too much, waving to the crowd, and was accused of giving a Nazi salute. It's so absurd. I found the whole news cycle to be just eye roll inducing and annoying and exhausting. But this is what they do. And the other part of it that was just classic left smear was their explanation as to why Elon Musk doesn't get the benefit of the doubt is, well, he's far right and he supports AfD in Germany. So, or he's quote tweeted people who could be considered to be far right. And so therefore, he must have been doing the Nazi salute because he holds views that the left considers distasteful.
I think this episode is just emblematic of the idea that the Democrats are out of energy right now. They are rudderless, and they have kind of a stale brand, stale messaging. They're accusing their political opponents of Nazis. It didn't wash. And they evidently, it seems, with the exception of some, for example, with the Lake and Riley Act bill, for example, and, we could talk about Fetterman obviously showed inclinations before of rationality, political rationality, and rationality on the merits. Basically, it's a party that hasn't learned any lessons based upon this response. It's also worth noting in this particular episode, obviously, Will is absolutely right. Elon Musk has shown philo-Semitism. And then on the other hand, by the way, Senator Murphy has been the ultimate Iran appeaser while up in the Senate. So standing with real-life modern Nazi regime today, worth emphasizing. And, of course, that goes for a lot of his Democratic colleagues as well. So, of course, they're hypocrites, obviously, here. But I think the one point that's worth making is, despite the fact they're rudderless and they've lost their message and they're playing to, an animated but still not majority, hyper-progressive, radical base, the Republicans can't get complacent. There's a massive opportunity to be seized here, but infighting and a million other things can end up halting the momentum, halting the opportunity at hand. One thing that we're seeing play out, and we're going to see probably by next week, we'll have a real sense as to whether or not this is going to be an issue, is the nominees. More nominees need to be confirmed as soon as possible. And there's a push this week. Tom Cotton came out and delivered a forceful message about this. And then Senator Thune has said they're going to work through the nights, they're going to work through weekends, et cetera. But there's this national security imperative, there's an economic security imperative, and a million other imperatives for getting nominees, cabinet level nominees, and then below appointed as soon as possible. It hasn't happened yet, with the exception of, for example, Marco Rubio, as we record this, for Secretary of State. There needs to be a massive push to get these people in place because personnel is policy. And the longer you give them, the more burrowing in there's going to be. There's more prepared sabotage that's going to take place within the bureaucracy. So it's imperative that Republicans seize the opportunity and the momentum that Trump came out of the gate with and ensure the personnel are in place to execute the essential policy that has to be done minimally over the first 100 days and first 2 years. And with that, I guess we can turn it over to parting shots, and we'll have Will kick it off.
Yeah. So my parting shots are about this ridiculous prayer or ridiculous sermon given at the National Cathedral during the prayer service by this hard leftist pastor. I mean, it was a stunningly silly lecture where she tried to, implore the president of the United States to take care of trans children, deeply politicized. And it reflected something very bizarre, about the Episcopal Church more broadly. I mean, my grandparents were Episcopalians, and I'm not a deeply religious person, but, I've thought to myself, I would like to at least be able to explore the faith of my ancestors. And, there were a lot of Episcopalians in my line. And I'd look at the modern Episcopalian church. I'm like, well, the church they went to doesn't even exist anymore. Well, this is not a church. It's like a political activist group wearing robes. It doesn't make any sense. And it struck me that, they're in this massively beautiful building, the National Cathedral. One of the most beautiful cathedrals we probably have in the United States, certainly in Washington, D.C. And instead of kind of elevating everybody, like the pastor's managing to bring everybody's mindset, it should be thinking about God, back down to the most basic political concern. It's the least elevating thing imaginable. And I just think it's really sad. I think it's time for somehow we just need to I don't know how to take back this church or make clear that, what the Episcopal Church is doing is just utterly unacceptable. And if they're not deserving of having that building, give it to a different denomination, or give it to, we need serious reform in the Episcopal Church, because it's really silly that, America does deserve sort of an American style high church for services just like this one. And that should be the Episcopalian Church, not only. I mean, the Catholic Church is more of a global church, I would say. So Episcopalianism is really parochial to the United States. Why is it like this? Why are these people this way? I don't understand it. So maybe the Episcopalians can tell me more about that. But anyway, that was my final one.
I'll jump in here. My final thought is more evidence of the winning and the vibe shift. In some ways, a very, very clear piece of evidence, more clear than anything explicitly political. But in order to get to it, I just have to say that all of the Trump family and the Vance family, they all looked impeccable throughout this entire inauguration weekend. Just fantastic and elegant choices from all of the women, well-cut suits on the men, right? Just a really elevating, I think, look to the first family and the second family that was very uplifting. But the point I wanted to make is that in part, that's because the big fashion houses have gotten on board with at least, quote unquote, normalizing Donald Trump and his second term. So Oscar de la Renta not only dressed Usha Vance, but bragged about it multiple times on their social media, Vogue on their social media, actually following the inauguration and not in a completely catty way, just, commenting, obviously commenting on the clothes, not on any politics, but the fact that fashion houses are coming around to doing that, just, I think, more evidence of a real shift and a real opening that the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself has to really shift some really important things in the country and put us on a very different trajectory than the one that we've been on, not just under the 4 years under Biden, but really since the end of the Cold War. So I find that very hopeful. And in addition, it was lovely to watch. Especially I like Melania's hat. I know that was the dividing line, but I loved especially the collar that she had, and then the hat with the collar. I thought it was impeccable and elegant. And apparently there are big fashion houses that now agree. And I think this 4 years, Melania is going to get her Vogue cover. That's my prediction.
I like the hat too. I like dark Melania. But my final thought is on Mike Turner being booted as the chairman for the House Intel Committee. He was unceremoniously ousted by Speaker Mike Johnson, which some reports claimed, Trump ordered Johnson to do it, but we did our own report at the Daily Caller where we talked to people familiar with the decision making, and it was pretty clear that this was going to happen whether Trump talked to Johnson about it or not. And there were several big reasons for it. One was that there was a Tablet magazine piece that came out a couple of weeks ago claiming that Mike Turner had been basically trying to take over Trump's intelligence community by putting his right-hand man on as chief of staff to Mike Waltz at the NSC. This led to basically a chain reaction of Mike Waltz denying that Turner had anything to do with staffing Trump's IC, and Turner even denying that he had any involvement. But it sort of was the snowball rolling down the hill for him. The people familiar with the decision said that basically the entire Republican conference had turned against Mike Turner, most notably for his shenanigans surrounding the reauthorization of warrantless spying through FISA, and his time had effectively run out. People were also furious with him for deferring to the intelligence community on determining where the origins of COVID came from. As late as March of 2023, he was saying on camera that we needed to wait for the IC before we were able to say with any confidence that COVID came from a lab and not of natural origin. So the fact that he's been ousted, that the Republicans are seemingly in lockstep with that position. The only people you really see criticizing Speaker Johnson for this are Democrats. It's a great sign of where the conference is headed and what their priorities are going to be under the Trump administration. So I thought it was a great development to get this sort of establishment IC guy out of this chairmanship.
I wanted to briefly mention one executive order that we didn't touch on before, near and dear to my heart, which is the Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship EO. This should be viewed as sort of the opening salvo in the Trump administration plan to dismantle and destroy the censorship industrial complex. And it does a few different things. The first is it says, no federal department, agency, entity, officer, employee, or agent may act or use any federal resources to engage in, facilitate, or fund conduct that would unconstitutionally abridge the free speech of any American citizen. So take the personnel out, take the policy out with respect to censorship directly or by proxy from government, and then ensure no taxpayer dollars go towards it. Things that I've advocated over and over again here and elsewhere. And then two, it also has a review of the last 4 years, which calls on the Attorney General and other relevant agency heads to review all the censorship conduct of the last 4 years and determine appropriate remedial action. So it's both prospective and then backward looking, which is essential because if you don't punish people and if you don't work with Congress ultimately to codify in law punishment for censoring Americans directly or by proxy, again, with a stroke of a pen, these policies can be changed, and there's really going to be no deterrent long-term to censorship industrial complex activity emanating from the federal government, which really proved the lifeblood of it in terms of funding, in terms of direction, coordination, and policy. So this is a major first step in what's going to be a fight over free speech with the big tech leaders there on the dais. That bodes well for the fact that they're at least going to play ball for these 4 years. We'll see what happens after that. but nevertheless, a very strong starting point for free speech and something that was promised in a first-day executive order to combat government-led censorship and prohibit it under this administration. So on that sunny note, on behalf of Will, Amber, and Inez, thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Weingarten, and we'll see you at the next NatCon Squad.